All right, guys, UFC 308 is tomorrow, but we got to talk about this first because Dana White decided to crash out on Donn Davis and the PFL. So that's what we're going to get into today. We're going to talk about what Dana had to say about PFL, what PFL had to say about Dana, and, you know, a couple other things such as Donn Davis's words for Kayla Harrison and also for this town hall meeting that he gave with Mike Heck over at MMA Fighting, which was not received well by the fan base. So we're going to get into that. I'm Wyatt. This is Fight Society. And before we get into the video, guys, please make sure to like, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. It really helps me out a lot. Become a channel member if you want to help the channel's growth and get access to extra content. And also, we have quite a few big announcements for this channel coming up. We have some very big news in multiple facets, completely different types of announcements for this channel. Some are minor changes, some are very big collaborations coming up. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to have more info for that for you guys next week. But until then, we got UFC 308 tomorrow, and I'm going to be doing the very first fight companion on this channel with more than just myself. I'm going to have two special guests on the stream in person for UFC 308. We're going to be streaming the main card tomorrow. But okay, let's get into it. First off, we have this video right here, posted by MMA Fighting, of Donn Davis during the fight week leading up to the Francis Ngannou fight against Renan Ferreira. This is what Donn Davis had to say about PFL compared to UFC. And he's talking shit.
Nervous about this outcome? No. Professional Fighters League is different from the other guys. The other guys are a promoter-driven league. And they have stakes in certain fighters winning. They put a lot of investments in Sugar Shane O'Malley. They work to make sure he wins. They invest a lot of marketing, hoping he's the next Conor McGregor. And then he falls flat, and they're disappointed. That's not what Professional Fighters League is about. We're a fighter-driven league. The fighters control their destiny. If they win, they advance. If they win 4 times, they become world champion in the league season. $1 million in the belt. I don't control anything here. I don't have favorites. I root for them all. That's what makes Professional Fighters League so great. Fighter-driven.
I understand where they're coming from about the strategy because they're trying to be different from the UFC, but a PFL belt doesn't mean anything right now. The $1 million paycheck means more than a PFL belt. I mean, do you really care about winning a PFL belt? No. You care about the $1 million check that they're giving you that comes along with that belt. So there's one. And two, it's a grueling season. I think it's 3 fights and they're all about 6 weeks from each other. I think it's fight, then fight again in 6 weeks, and then fight again after that. And then you have playoffs. So it's like 5 fights a year to become a world champion in PFL, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a grueling schedule. The pay is lower. The publicity is lower. I understand all of that Donn Davis is saying, but he is talking like an investor or like someone that's trying to pitch to investors about the best and we don't control it. I get that, but the fans don't care about that. The fans want big fights. End of story.
Versus promoter driven. Doesn't matter who wins and loses here to us. We rip them all, we support them all. There's 650 million MMA fans.
Terrible voice crack there too.
In the world. And right now you only get 60 great fights a year. That's 40 from UFC, 20 from Professional Fighters League. Well, it's 4,000 soccer matches. So all
20 great fights a year from PFL is a huge stretch.
of you should be fans of both UFC and PFL. There's only 60 great fights a year, and there's 650 million events. So it's not either or. It's 2 great companies doing very different things. The second thing, we have equal fighter talent, professional fighters do. Yes, the UFC's brand is bigger. We recognize that for the new guy. We have to work harder during year 5, during year 30. But if push came to shove, and it was 5 fights,
I don't know who this person is talking in the background of this interview. It's so annoying.
We picked 5, they picked 5. Let me tell you, they wouldn't do that. Because we went half and they won.
Okay, let's be honest. If we're talking about 5 and 5 just off the Apex prelims versus 5 PFL fighters, yeah, they probably split down the middle. But if we're talking about UFC champions or top 5 guys against top PFL guys, UFC runs the table. Maybe Francis Ngannou beats Aspinall or Jones, but I genuinely don't see, like, Impa Kasanganay won the 205-pound $1 million check, and he was a welterweight. And he got KO'd by Joaquin Buckley at middleweight. He's going to beat Alex Pereira? Don't treat us like we're dumb, Donn Davis.
He went half and they pay. That's why Dana, hashtag Dana scared, would never do that. He knows that, and we know that. So, but be fans of all of it. We love all fighting. We root for all fighters and watch them both. Question is about.
Okay, so there's that. We also have what he had to say about Kayla Harrison. They talk about being fighter first. Here's Donn Davis on Alan Joban and Dean Thomas's podcast talking about how Kayla ran.
Speak of Kayla Harrison. I know you've had some choice words with her. Have you spoken to her recently, or what's your relationship like with her now?
No, and choice words, I wouldn't describe it. Look, we brought Kayla into MMA from the Olympics, developed her into an 18-1 star, two-time champion, and one of the greatest women, top 5 in the sport today. Nothing but pride for that, and nothing but respect for Kayla. As a competitor to build the company, I want every great fighter here. I want every fighter here, just like you want every guest on your show. If you're a reporter, you want every story. If you're a fighter, you want every win. So I'm disappointed that we couldn't keep Kayla here for what I think are the 2 biggest fights of her legacy career. Avenging Panchenko and winning the championship, and beating Cyborg, who's the greatest ever. I think those are the 2 toughest.
It's easy for him to say that those are the toughest fights and the biggest fights for her legacy when they're the fights that he wants to happen in the PFL. You know what I'm saying? And even though Cyborg and Pacheco are objectively much harder fights than Holly Holm, Ketlin Vieira, and eventually Juliana Pena, but you have to understand Kayla Harrison's monetary decision to go there, long-term freedom, because PFL wanted her for life, and you also have to consider the fact that Kayla Harrison is trying to get an Amanda Nunes fight, which would be a massive payday.
Fights ahead of Kayla. I don't like that she ran from those. I don't like that. And that she ran to a brand to validate herself. I think so highly of Kayla Harrison, she doesn't need a brand to validate her. She's that great.
Yeah, to you, okay, you guys get my point.
Some fighters need a brand to validate them. Some employees need a validation of a brand. Some people need to wear clothes or jewelry to validate them. And other people are so strong that their actual actions and accomplishments validate themselves. That's how highly I think of her. So that disappointed me.
Donn Davis was quoted as saying that PFL did better numbers than UFC or equal numbers to UFC, something like that. But here is Dana. Here's Dana responding to the things that Donn Davis had to say about PFL's numbers, all that.
At the apex, beat them. So, listen, I understand, and I love the stuff that he said. He sounds like Kamala. Talks a lot, but says nothing. And I would hate to be one of that guy's investors. I don't watch MMA. I've worked 7 years and haven't taken a vacation. You should probably take a vacation. You're out of your fucking mind, dude.
Now, a couple things that Dana says there. One, I do have to be fair to Donn Davis. I do have to call this both ways because I got to be even here. I got to tell you guys my honest opinion. They're in year 30. Donn Davis is in year 5, whatever it is. He says, I would hate to be one of that guy's investors. Well, Donn Davis has actual investors. Dana White had his close friends, the Fertittas, that were the investors. So when things weren't going so financially well, he could talk to them on a friend-to-friend level and say, let's keep this thing afloat. There's something here. I think Dana's even been quoted before as saying that the Fertittas wanted to pull the plug on the company because they were losing so much money. They were like 40 million in the hole or something like that, if I remember that story correctly. So it's much easier. Like he says, I'd hate to be one of that guy's investors. Yeah, because he actually has to prove something to them. The Fertittas were your buddies and you guys all stuck it out and it worked out, but they weren't traditional investors. And Dana White doesn't really have experience with traditional investors up until, I'd say, Saudi Arabia, not Saudi Arabia, the UAE buying a stake of the company, but they were already successful by then. And then you also have the TKO holdings with Endeavor and all of that, but you're already an established company. And you had your friends that are brothers invest for you and let you build it. You're in a much very different starting point. I might actually, I might say from a company standpoint, PFL is in a harder position because MMA is not so novelty anymore. It's not like, whoa, oh my God, they elbow each other in the face. People accept it as a sport now. So Dana White had the harder job of making it not taboo and getting people to accept it. PFL has the harder time with actually proving themselves as a business, but they probably also have more investment. So I'm not trying to sit on a fence here. I just want to point out both sides of what's going on here.
You should probably take a vacation.
What I was going to say,
I have a list here.
Oh, and not watching MMA is also what Dana said. Donn Davis went on this with Mike Heck.
He made it.
And he was asked about having, what was his favorite MMA fight of all time? And he said it was a Mike Tyson fight. He said that he doesn't have an MMA fight off the top of his head, and that he's more into old school boxing. So that didn't sit well with the fans.
We'll have Lene get you guys this list of all these numbers, but that guy shouldn't even mention the UFC. He's not even in power slaps. And then he was talking about, there's all kinds of combination packages and how all this works. He doesn't beat power slap in revenue. He doesn't beat power slap in ticket sales. He doesn't beat power slap in sponsorship. He doesn't beat power slap in anything, let alone the UFC. UFC Vegas 8.
So there's that. And then this is also him talking about Francis. He says all of this because UFC Vegas 84, which was the first Vegas or Apex event of this year, it was the rematch of Johnny Walker and Magomed Ankalaev. He was saying that one did more numbers than the Francis fight, which is the biggest PFL fight to date.
Performance, given everything that's happened to him in his career, the 2 losses in boxing, the loss of his son.
It was better than Donn Davis's. Way better. Listen, man, I think that I'm going to tell you what I think about what Francis is all about the money. Francis left because he knew that if he fought John Jones and didn't win, it would hurt his chances of making the money that he wanted to make. But realistically, his deal was bigger here. His deal was bigger here if he stayed in the UFC. I think I've told this story a million times. They can deny it all they want. Why the fuck would I lie? What do I care? It doesn't matter to me one way or the other. I was going to cut Francis when he lost 2 in a row. I was going to cut him.
That was after the Derek Lewis
Yeah.
fight?
Somebody around here begged me not to do it. And, so it wouldn't have mattered to me one way or the other, There's a much deeper story to this whole thing. And he would have made more money if he stayed in the UFC. So he didn't want to fight John Jones. That's a fact, my friend. We're moving on. Obviously, everybody loves Tom Aspinall and wants to see Jones and Aspinall or Stipe and Aspinall. And I feel like when Stipe and John were young, John was 23, youngest champion ever in UFC history. And
okay, the rest is about Tom Aspinall and Jones and Stipe and all that. But what he said there about making more money in the UFC, it may have been specifically for the Jones fight. Because if I remember correctly, the deal that they offered him was like $8 million for the John Jones fight, but it wasn't per fight for the length of the contract. It was like $8 million for this one fight. And then the rest of them, it would depend on if he was champion or not still, which is like pretty typical. So I understand maybe he would have made more money for the John Jones fight than he got paid for the PFL fight. But you also have to take into consideration the $30 million of pay that he got from these 2 boxing fights against Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. So Dana decided to crash out on the PFL, and some of it's true, some of it's not, some of it's hearsay. But Dana is still winning the court of public opinion in MMA, obviously. UFC is much bigger than PFL. Donn Davis did this interview with Mike Heck. It was a town hall with Mike Heck, live fan Q&A from MMA Fighting. And if you look at the chat, guys, the chat was not friendly to him. This is what the chat on here had to say. Guy is lost. Wow. We have guy is lost. Wow. No need. Get him out of here. This has been extremely embarrassing, Don. Let's continue. Oh yeah, he also said Jake Paul does 400,000 pay-per-view buys and the UFC does 200. Donn blew this interview. This guy would be a nightmare to work for. How do these types get to work? All these type of things. This guy would be a nightmare, blah, 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 blah. He's pretty much telling hardcore fans they don't matter, which he also said that the casual fans more important. But really only hardcore fans are watching PFL. So there's a quick wrap up about everything that happened between PFL and UFC this week. One thing I've noticed is that Dana is much more open to talking about these other promotions, and it doesn't mean that he's scared. It doesn't mean that they've earned acknowledgement. it means that the UFC has gotten big enough to where they don't feel threatened by a PFL or a Bellator or one championship or anything like that. So let me know what you guys think. I think Dana, although he said some things that weren't true, Donn Davis said some things that were true. There's a couple L's and dubs on both sides. Dana obviously is going to be the one that comes out with the win here. He's the one with the successful company, and Donn Davis is just mentioning the UFC for clicks on PFL stuff. So let me know what you guys think. Does PFL even stand a chance like ever? Do you think they're around long term? Do they stick around like Bellator, or do you think they burn out in the next few years and are maybe like no longer in existence by 2030? So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Live stream with in-person special guests for UFC 308 tomorrow morning. Make sure you tap in.